Hey y'all, I'm Lexi, and I have a dog, Ludo, over there. You can maybe see his head pop. And this is not where I usually film my videos. I'm just quickly putting this in to say that this is actually a part 2 in a 2-part video series. So if you want to see part 1, you can go ahead and click on that link up there, and that'll take you to part 1. But if you already know the story of Anneliese and how she died, this video is just going to be talking about the trial that happened after she died, and then also talking about my personal opinions on what happened to Anneliese. I do not believe that she was possessed. I do believe that it was mental illness. So this video, I'm going to be kind of talking about all of that. So if you don't know about Anneliese Michel, if you've never heard of her, then click on that video up there. If you are all filled in, then we can just get started. On July 1st, after 67 exorcisms and countless illnesses, Anneliese finally succumbed and died at the age of 23, weighing only 66 pounds. Anna rang Father Alt to tell him of Anneliese's untimely death, but he refused to believe it, thinking that it was the demons playing a trick. So he sent Father Rolf, who confirmed that Anneliese had in fact passed away. He's guessing around 6 a.m. that morning. Father Rolf, though, did not have any death certificates on him at the time, so they called in Dr. Keeler. When he arrived, he was just as horrified and was not convinced that this was natural causes. The author of one of the books that I got most of my information from made a really good point. If Dr. Rolf had had the paperwork, and there's a really good chance that there would have never been any deeper investigation. But because Dr. Keeler wasn't sure if it was natural deaths or not, a criminal investigation was started. The media, of course, picked the story and took off running. This started a nationwide debate around Anneliese. People would travel to Klingenberg to see Anneliese's grave and to pray the rosary. Father Rintz was doing a media run, and Father Helm was playing the exorcism tapes publicly before the police confiscated them. I forgot to mention that postpartum was taken of Anneliese before the investigation started, and it showed that she died due to starvation, possibly aggravated by physical exertion. Her body was completely covered in bruises and cuts. She had teeth that were missing, and her eyes were totally black all the way around them. Sort of like mine are, but naturally. And both of her knees were broken due to countless genuflections that she was doing. So I just thought I would mention that because I thought it was important. The trial took about a year before it started. There was talks at the time that the state attorney did not want to pursue, but on July 13th, 1977, Fathers Rintz and Alt and Joseph and Anna Michel were being prosecuted for negligent homicide. Negligent homicide. I'm saying that weird too. Okay, Fathers Rintz and Alt and Joseph and Anna Michel were being told they were being prosecuted for negligent homicide. Before the trial started, a nun was claiming that Anneliese was visiting her and telling the nun that they needed to excommunicate her body. And if they did, then according to this nun, they would find that Anneliese's body was not decomposed at all, and this would prove that she was possessed and that the devil is real. So on February 25th, 1978, the Michels actually got the okay to exhume Anneliese's body under the pretenses that they wanted to give her a more expensive coffin, saying that they rushed the funeral before and they weren't able to give her the coffin that they wanted. Word about this got around, and the exhuming of her coffin ended up becoming a whole event filled with media, authority, and strangers alike. When the coffin was brought to the surface, they found her remains to be in an advanced stage of decomposition, but refused to let the Michels see for their own mental well-being. But due to the fact that the family and Father Rintz were not allowed to see the body, this only sparked more debate around Anneliese and her assumed possession. Fathers Rintz and Alt had lawyers appointed to them by the Diocese of Würzburg, while Anna and Joseph were defended by a very well-known German lawyer who had defended and won a lot of cases for Nazi war criminals. Father Alt was the first to speak, and he remained true to his belief through the whole trial, stating that he never believed Anneliese was sick, but yet possessed. He told the court how Anneliese viewed her suffering as penance, and he wanted the tapes to be made public so people would believe in the devil, and that if he had felt that she was physically sick, that he would have sought that sort of treatment. Peter and Thea told the court that Anneliese did not want any medical attention as she was terrified of being sent away. Dr. Roth spoke at the trial as well, but he seemed to conveniently not remember anything. And this was a big hit for the defense, since they were really hoping that Father Roth would be kind of the saving grace to their case. The judge read the letters written by the fathers during the exorcisms to the bishop, even though Father Alt tried to stop it using his priesthood as his crutch. Father Rintz would then play some of the audio from Anneliese's exorcism to show how certain rites being said would elicit certain responses from the demons, proving in his eyes that she was possessed. A professor from the psychiatric clinic Anneliese was being treated at spoke at the trial as well. Though he never personally met Anneliese, he was very familiar with her case. He believed that the dietin was working in suppressing her seizures, causing her illness to find a new outlet, causing her grand mal seizures. Her inability to go to church was, he believed, psychosomatic, and these, quote, sick conceptions became delusional ones, end quote, causing her to have psychogenic psychosis. These exorcisms just confirming her delusions, making everything worse. It was his belief that Anneliese would still be alive today if not for these exorcisms. The father's lawyers thought it would be helpful to get psychiatrists to look at them so that they can say that the fathers were of sane mind. They finally found 2 psychiatrists who were willing to do it, and they went on to write a 100-page paper on the fathers. They both believed the fathers to be of sane mind, just deeply religious. They also noted that they believed that Dilatin was working, and also believed Anneliese was suffering from psychogenic psychosis. The doctors believed the fathers acted out of religious conviction, stating it came from, quote, naive, needless to say, primitive religious views. Both of them leaned towards magical, mystical ideas that were, to say the least, unusual for theologians of our time, end quote. The prosecution asked all 4 accused to be found guilty of negligent homicide due to failure to act, and the 4 were sentenced to 6 months in prison, which was then suspended and became a 3-year probation. Father Alt and Rins were fined and were responsible for all court costs, which of course the diocese then took care of. They attempted to appeal the decision, but just decided to let it be. So was it a demon that killed Anneliese? Or was it malnourishment and mistreatment for a mental illness? Although Anneliese's case is undoubtedly a tragic one, I find it hard to believe that it's one of possession and not of mental illness. Let's ask ourselves, Anneliese asked for a priest. Why would demons want a priest? Or why would they allow Anneliese to contact a priest? Wouldn't that be one of the last things the demons wanted? The demons would talk about the right way to worship so that they were not able to do things like this and weren't able to take over. Again, wouldn't the demons want to keep all of the information pretty hush-hush? So why would Anneliese also then be possessed by good spirits like Barbara Weisband and the Virgin Mary? Why would the demons call her Snot-Nose so often? Doesn't that seem like a rather personal attack? Why wasn't there symptoms of possession until after these kids had suggested that it was possession? There are multiple other mental illnesses that I feel offer a closer explanation to Anneliese Michel's untimely death, like psychotic illnesses, Tourette's, and DID, to name a few. Let's compare what we know about Anneliese's case to what we know about dissociative identity disorder, or DID. Disclaimer, I do not mean to be sounding like I'm diagnosing anybody. I'm nowhere close to being a doctor. I'm just a girl at home who has a lot of free time and a laptop. I'm simply comparing what we know about Anneliese to what we know about DID. I'm not diagnosing anybody. I just want to instill some form of reasonable doubt that Anneliese was possessed and that maybe it could have been something like DID. There's really not much research on DID at the moment, so I'm sorry if anything I do say is out of date or glossed over. I tried to get all of my information from up-to-date sources like the DSM. There's like a lot to DID, and I'm really not going to be talking much about that here because this is really about Anneliese and not about DID. So there might be things that sound glossed over, or I'll just have definitions up on the screen, and that's just because I just simply don't have time to break down this mental illness that is extremely complicated. Most of my research is coming from the DSM-5, along with research that I've just done over the years watching YouTube channels such as Dissociative, who I'll be referencing. So the diagnosis of DID has changed over the years. First it was lumped in with schizophrenia, and then it got its own diagnosis but was misnamed multiple personality disorder, and then there was more research being done and it was given a more fitting title of dissociative identity disorder. Quoting from the DSM-5, dissociative identity disorder is characterized by the presence of two or more distinct personality states of an experienced possession and reoccurring episodes of amnesia. The fragmentation of identity may vary with culture and circumstance. Thus, individuals may experience discontinuities in identity and memory that may not be immediately evident to others or are obscured by attempts to hide dysfunctions. Individuals with dissociative identity disorder experience reoccurrent, inexplicable intrusions into their conscious functioning and sense of self. Examples: voices, dissociative actions and speech, intrusive thoughts, emotions, and impulses. B. Alterations of sense of self. Examples: attitude, preferences, feeling like one's body or actions are not their own. And C. Odd changes of perception. Examples being depersonalization or derealization, such as feeling detached from one's body while cutting. And D. Intermittent functional neurological symptoms. Stress also produces transient exacerbation. The defining feature of dissociative identity disorder is the presence of two or more distinct personal states or an experience of possession. So reading the definition alone and not even going into this, you can see how we can relate most of what is being said here to Anneliese. Individuals with dissociative identity disorder may report the feeling of suddenly becoming depersonalized observers of their own actions and speech, and they may feel powerless to stop. Such individuals also report perceptions of voices. We know that Anneliese was hearing knocking. As one of her early symptoms, she was hearing knocking, and eventually those were turning into voices in her head, as well as she was talking about not having the ability to control her own body and feeling like an observer to what's happening around her, or what she's doing. So how does one get DID? DID happens when there has been repeated abuse at a young age. It's the brain's defense mechanism to being able to cope with repetitive attacks on an adolescent undeveloped brain. I do plan on making a video on DID in the semi-near future. There's a lot of research that I need to do, but I do plan on making a video on DID in the future and go way more into how it's formed and also how groups and programs like MKUltra would purposely use these on children to give them DID. So I do also want to say that this is also quoted from the DSM. Non-maltreatment forms of overwhelming early events, such as multiple long, painful, early life medical procedures may also be reported. We know Anneliese suffered from many different illnesses in her lifetime. Even just before the age of 5, she had serious illnesses like mumps and measles. So you can only imagine the kind of treatment that she was being put in at a young age like that, and what that has, what kind of effect that has on the mind. So I'm not saying that her family abused her or anything like that. We don't have full stories, so I'm not going to say yes or no either way. Regardless, it's not any of our place to insinuate anything. I just wanted to have it be known that there is also other ways of getting DID rather than being like abused by your parents. So to go back to the DSM definition of DID, and it's saying alternate states of self must be present. Rude. Oh my god, such a So back to the DSM-5 definition of DID, it says alternate states of self must be present. People in the DID community call these alternate states of self alters. Some systems have many alters, others only have a few. Alters can be born, they can die, though they never actually fully die, or they can integrate with other alters throughout a person's life. So alters take on very important roles in the system. There are protectors, prosecutors, and littles, just to name a few. Other ones are demon alters. Demon and demonic alters are a type of spiritual and supernatural alters, but are not actual supernatural beings, and may result from spiritual abuse and an abuser who blames the child for the abuse. They may have the role of maintaining loyalty to an abusive cult who created them in order to keep the person alive. They are often a form of protector known as prosecutor. Prosecutor alters are alters that harbor all of the person's worst memories, the ones that made the person form DID. So it's not to say that these are evil alters or anything like of that sort. It's just hard to, it's a hard thing to explain without going into a lot of detail. But in layman's terms, prosecutor alters often take on the role of an abuser, causing the person to hurt themselves, so that in their brain they think that I'm hurting myself, so the abuser doesn't have to hurt me. Anneliese's physical abuse seemed to be mostly directed towards herself, unless she felt somebody was trying to stop her from getting better, i.e. she was chipping her teeth from eating walls, not eating or drinking, and hitting herself, just to name a few examples. And like I said, if somebody was trying to help her, then that would be when it was directed towards them. But other than that, it seemed to be mostly just directed towards herself. There's also famous alters, which are alters based on fictional characters or people known to the person with DID. These alters are internal personalizations, so they are taking a person that they don't know and giving them their own representation on them based on what they do know about them. These could be her Barbara alter, her Hitler alter, her Jesus alter, the Virgin Mary. Those can all be considered famous alters or interjects, as they are her representations of what she knows of these people. And then there's fictional alters. These are based on such sources as like nursery rhymes, children's tales and stories and such like that. But now Anneliese, she didn't grow up with fables like we did. She grew up in the church, so she would grow up on stories of Cain and Abel and stories of how Satan fell from heaven and such, and those kinds of stories. So it makes sense that she would take on alters like Cain. And then the most damning one is possession alters. So these are regarded as possession-formed identities. If a person is consciously aware of the actions of the alter, then the person may describe themselves as feeling possessed by an outside person, spirit, deity, demon, or a ghost. Possession alter... Quiet! Possession form alters are not part of the normal cultural possession experience. They are involuntary, recurrent, and distressing. Animal alters are also common. People can also have more than one type of alter along with other types. For example, child alters or protectors. Alters who believe they are spiritual or spiritual beings should be treated the same way of any other alter identity. With psychotherapy, exorcisms are known to be harmful and ineffective in treating complex dissociative disorders, and attempts should not be made to get rid of alters. Instead, they should be understood as a way of coping with traumatic life experiences. Studies were done on DID that showed that different alters actually have different brain chemistry. This is the most interesting thing about DID, if you ask me. So a few examples of this. One girl with DID was blind for over 10 years, and then one of her other alters stepped forward and fronted, and she was able to see again. Another case was of Timmy, who was allergic to oranges. If he got one, he'd have hives. Unless another alter would then take over, then the hives would disappear. Another man didn't have control of his arm and thought he was possessed, but he was later diagnosed with DID. Other cases show alters having different eye colors. This could explain things like alters having black eyes, different accents, and even different strengths within the human limit. This isn't split.
Rejoice! broken are the more evolved.
Different things can trigger different alters to come forward, and switches can happen either quickly or they can take time. Triggers can be smells, something touching you a certain way, different sights, or hearing certain things are all things that can spark a switch. So here's a clip of how these bows and toys sparked Chloe from the dissociative system that I mentioned earlier, switch to one of her little alters.
My favorite. I can tell. He's very, very, very close. I told you. Ooh. One person front. One person, please. Okay, we've got a Kyle and Chloe Cocon mush. Did you see how fast we picked that up out of the thing? I don't know why that happened so fast. I got her. Shit, this is a long switch.
So this can explain why the sight of holy objects triggered the Judas altar, and how praying sparked the Virgin Mary altar, or at least the Anneliese altar, the host altar, to step forward. Altars don't always get along. Think of altars as their own separate person inside of a vessel that happens to be a body. So they can form relationships with each other, they can hate each other, they can fall in love with each other. This meaning they can also fight with each other, which Anneliese had expressed that they were doing. They can fight inside her head, or they can fight externally using different tones and expressions to show which of the altars was speaking. Which of the altars was speaking. Okay, I'll make room. Damn. Altars can also form their own space within the system.
In some circumstances, you can have essentially subsystems within a system, and that can be like a separate area of the inner world. It can be a separate like collection of altars that are kind of separate or separated from, or function under their own dynamic from other parts of the system, and they can be referred to as a subsystem, especially in larger systems like polyfragmented systems, things like that are common, right? And sometimes there are altars who kind of appear on their own or stick to their own sort of areas of the world. It's complicated. Everything about DID and OSDD is complicated.
This meaning that altars that get along with each other can go off in a little corner inside your brain and kind of form their own community. So this meaning that the Cain, Judas, Fletcherman, those altars could have all went off to their own community. The Mary, Barbara Weisgand, and Jesus altars all could have gone off to their own community, never having to communicate with each other. Catatonia is also comorbid with DID, so meaning if you have DID, there's a very, very, very good chance that you also suffer from catatonia. Anneliese would be stuck motionless for a long period of time, like when Peter found her in the church. She would have catatonic excite when she would run around the room or hit herself or doing countless genuflections. Catatonic posturing would happen to Anneliese. Often she would be stuck in contorted states that nobody would be able to fix her from. Catatonic rigidity would happen where Anneliese in her hypnotic-like state would get stuck in bed, not able to move and feeling like there was that pressure on her. Individuals with DID may present with predominantly medically unexplained neurological symptoms such as non-epileptic seizures, PNS, or psychogenic non-epileptic seizures are episodes of movement, sensation, or behaviors that are similar to epileptic seizures, but they do not have a neurologic origin. Rather, they are symptomatic manifestations of psychological distress. PNS is very comorbid with DND. Anneliese had seizures where EEGs showed nothing, which makes me wonder if it was epilepsy or PNS. Had they had more research on this at the time, I wonder if her diagnoses would have changed. So DID explains quite a bit of the stories of Anneliese. What about ones that we can't explain? Well, in my personal opinion, we don't have full context of any of this, including the stories that are not able to be explained. And a lot of those stories, the more mystical stories, come from Father Rintz. And truthfully, I question his motives quite a few times throughout my research, and whether his goal was to help Anneliese or to further his traditional Roman Catholic ideas and saw this as an opportunity to get people on board and to bring the church back to its traditional way. So stories like Anneliese guessing where in the water came from and such alike, I just wonder, we don't have the full context. We don't know if she did overhear him saying that or saw him walking from the tap. I don't know. We don't have full context of any of this. So could it have been possession? Maybe, but in my personal opinion, Anneliese Michel was a young girl who grew up very strictly religious, and when at a young age something bad happened to her, whether that was repetitive abuse or multiple painful doctor visits, she formed DID to protect herself, and due to her strict Roman Catholic upbringing, it manifested itself as possession. This is backed up by the fact that it didn't seem like possession was even a thought of hers until the kids poked fun at her, saying that demons were inside her. There's also a lot of people in the church who met with her and didn't feel that she was possessed and that she should continue seeking medical attention. The changes in eye color, mood, strength, her face, her seizures, dissociating, aversion to holy symbols, random bursts of energy, and catatonic states can all be explained by illnesses like DID. I believe when the fathers would pray to her, that it really would help her. It would subdue the other altars and allowed her to front, unless she was in a heightened state of stress. I also believe with the proper diagnosis and treatment that Anneliese would not have died at the young age of 23, and her last words would not have been, "Mama, please stay with me. I'm afraid." If anyone feels like there is something wrong with them and they are having mental health issues, please contact a professional. Don't go on the internet and diagnose yourself. It can be good to, look at what the internet has to say, but then also talk to a professional and get a professional's opinion. Don't just diagnose yourself. I also really want to clearly say that I in no way think that if you have DID that this is how you act. Every DID situation is different. Every trauma is different, and each way that our body and brain deals with the trauma is different. I believe that Anneliese's mental illnesses manifested in this way because of her upbringing and failures on doctors who would misdiagnose her or just throw medications at her. People like the dissociative system who has DID can work through it and now has a really great communication, in my humble opinion, between her and her alters in a way that she can pretty much live a normal life. It'll never be a fully normal life. It's definitely a very horrific mental illness to suffer from, but it doesn't mean that you're possessed and that you're going to manifest it in this way. DID and other mental illnesses are not a death sentence, and I just want to make that super clear. With treatment and talking to somebody, you can live out a totally normal life. And that's the story of Anneliese Michel. I would love to hear anyone's opinions and whether you completely disagree with me and you think that she 100% undoubtedly was possessed. I'd love to hear all of that. Sorry about the lighting, the sun went down as I was filming this, but until next time, bye!